we have all this spending proposed legislation that is stuck in the hallways of Congress, and we don't even know how to really attach a price tag to it anymore. We think we know a price tag, but then we're told one, but then it's really not that. And then it's funny money for 10 years or 5 years or 12 years or whatever. So we're still trying to dig through this. And I've invited Mark Mix, who is with the National Right to Work Foundation, to join us once again because he's uncovered some interesting things in these spending bills, and that's where the unions are getting favorable treatment again and again and again. And I think they've already gotten some favorable treatment in the previous spending bills. Mark Mix, thanks for coming back.
Well, Denise, it's good to be on with you again. And, this is the one downsmanship of talk radio. I mean, we have to convince them that what we talked about last week is not nearly as bad as what we talked about this week. So we'll try to deliver. I promise. Okay.
Well, look, we obviously know that President Biden is a union guy, tried and true. I mean, he just bleeds unions. But he's not writing the legislation. And I'm not even sure he's reading it. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's not reading it. So as a consequence, it's coming from someplace else that we have to keep giving preferential treatment to unions. And it really doesn't matter which ones. It could be the teachers union. It could be the IBEW. It could be, it goes all over the place. So I think it's circle money. In other words, it just is, it's money that the government gives to the unions, and then the unions turn around and give it right back to these politicians. Is that about right?
Yeah, Denise. Yeah, that's right. We call it the vicious cycle. Union officials give money to candidates, and they give it to primarily one party, but much to the chagrin of a lot of rank and file union members across the country, frankly, Denise. I mean, there are a lot of folks out there that are paying union dues or fees as a condition of employment in the non-right to work states that have a significant objection to the way union officials spend the money. And it's important that we just kind of dissect that for a second, because, Joe Biden talks about being union through and through, but what he's not rank and file union worker. He's big labor boss union through and through. And you only have to go as far as the Keystone Pipeline to recognize that, or the executive order regarding energy policy in the United States of America. I mean, when they shut down the Keystone Pipeline, they didn't put any non-union workers out of work. They put union rank and file members, operating engineers and welders and the building trades out of work. And then when they changed their energy policy as it relates to federal lands across the country, they weren't putting non-union workers out of work. They were putting union workers out of work. And when Richard Trumka, who passed away not too long ago, was asked about this, he said, well, this isn't that bad. This is important, but I just wish he would have balanced it. Like, meaning, he would have given us more money or given us more power when he put all these union people out of work. And so it's very important that we make the distinction between rank and file workers and union officials back here in Washington, D.C. And to your point, you're right. They're buying off the political decision-making process of the unions, not necessarily the rank and file workers. And these two bills, the so-called infrastructure bill, which is not infrastructure for the most part, and then the reconciliation bill, which we really don't even know what that is. The infrastructure bill comes in around 2,700 pages. The reconciliation bill is going to come in at around 5,000 pages. And not only does Joe Biden not read it, Denise, none of the people that vote on it read it either, I suspect. But anyway, as Nancy Pelosi said way back when, you gotta pass it to know what's in it. And that's where we are in Washington right now.
Mark, help me with this, because I think if you really examine what is happening here, it's somewhere between a Ponzi scheme and RICO. And I mean that sincerely. If you kind of really look at, Ponzi schemes in the United States are illegal, and so is RICO. And if you kind of really look at both of those laws and what is happening here, it's a conspiracy. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah.
help me with that. Am I overstating it? Because I don't think I
No.
am.
No, I think there's something to that, and frankly, one thing, not to bring up another issue, but your listeners may not believe this, but you might, and that is that union officials are exempt from prosecution under the Hobbs Act, which is the racketeering statute, for acts of violence and acts of union activity that are designed to achieve legitimate union objectives. So when they get together to create a cabal to either through violence or through intimidation or other coercive means, they can't be prosecuted under the racketeering laws like ordinary citizens could. So yeah, there's something to that. And then the Ponzi scheme that you pay out the money to the person that needs it the most in the immediate sense and take it from the others who don't. And then finally, when their turn comes, there's nothing left because it was a Ponzi scheme. And these infrastructure bills, for example, the infrastructure bill that doesn't have a whole lot of infrastructure in it. On page 2038, there are 16 words in that bill that say that the government will allocate $43 billion for so-called telecom broadband build-out. But there's 16 words in that particular section of that bill on page 2038 that basically says this money will only go to organizations that have unions and that force their workers to join unions as a condition of employment. I mean, they say that you must uphold the labor regulations and there should be no hint of any malfeasance against workers and unions in your history. And now that doesn't mean you have to be prosecuted for malfeasance. It just means you have to have rumors of malfeasance in that particular guide. It's like blacklisting. And so not only do you have racketeering and Ponzi schemes, but now you got blacklisting. And it all comes when you spend money like this and you try to favor those people that are your political allies. And it happens on both sides, Denise, let's be fair. I mean, shoot. Big business profits pretty well, and they've got teams of lawyers up here in Washington that fine tune the dials of government so they can block competition and win little trinkets for them that help their bottom line. And union officials are the same way, and they don't necessarily represent their rank and file workers, as I mentioned earlier.
So before I've asked this question to some lawyers and I really can't get an answer because it's never been done before, but it's almost as though we should be able to sue to stop this kind of stuff from even being in the bill to start with over discrimination or racketeering or Ponzi, or you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's I want to stop it before it gets any traction.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're onto something there. I mean, the idea of equal protection under the law is something that we take pretty seriously, and it's part of our, part of the Constitution. This idea of the law should apply equally to everyone. And when you start handing out favors in the form of big business and big money, and you start doing that, and you start saying, okay, in order to get this part of the bill, the infrastructure bill, you have to have a union contract. I mean, that's not equal protection. And there have been plenty of state laws around the country that we've been involved in where, they want to kind of put this union group in and want to exempt this union group. And so that equal protection becomes a very, very important debate. And it's happening right now, Denise. You won't be surprised, but the union bosses and the regressive left here in Washington have decided that police people, law enforcement officers are no longer a favored constituency. So all these union bills as it relates to the government sector, they're excluding police officers because they don't like them anymore, right? They need to defund the police. And so now they're giving these benefits to firefighters, but they're discriminating against a particular institution because they're police officers and they don't like them anymore. And so to your point, that equal protection, that idea of stopping things before it ever comes up is really a legitimate argument to make that this is discriminatory. You're actually picking winners and losers, and that's not what the law should be.
Well, it's kind of like can you really sue over a crime that hasn't happened yet? Well,
there was a movie about that, wasn't there? It's called, I don't know, Tom Cruise did a movie about that. You got arrested for thinking about committing a crime. And boy, oh boy, I'd be doing a life sentence right now, Denise, if that was the case. But, and maybe you would be too. I suspect. I'm not the only one. Okay. Yeah.
Don't tell me.
Okay. Yeah.
But, it's, I think that a lot of the exposure certainly came from the teachers unions, and where we have been here in the last several months of the influence that the teachers union has on classrooms. You and I have discussed that many times, but that is a template, I would say, on what's happening with these other unions and how these bills, how these things get injected into these bills. And there's got to be a way. There's just got to be a way to call somebody out on this. And it's kind of like, where are the Republicans on this one? So
Yeah.
if you were to go to somebody on the Hill that looks like they might have some guts, and what do you want to say to them? Do you want to say we're not getting equal protection? Do you want to say somebody needs to look into this? Somebody needs to file an injunction? Where would you go with that?
Well, when you think about the operation of the legislative branch of our federal government and the legislative branch of state government or wherever the legislative branches are operating, you can't stop someone from writing a bill. And what you can do is you can expose it, like you're doing, Denise. And it's so important, the role that you play in all of this is to make people aware of what the heck is happening. Because the only way politicians will stop doing this is if you hold them accountable for it. Mm-hmm. And obviously the Republican Party's not doing that. Someone said it much better than I can say it, but they said, the only difference between the two parties is one's faster than the other from a standpoint of imposing tyranny and increasing the size of government. I mean, and that historically, that's been kind of true. It's not like, when the other side's in power, the other side squawks and screams about how they're benefiting their friends. And, we've gone way outside the fence posts and the boundaries of the, the size and scope of the federal government. And that's, I don't know, what's the metaphor? Don't close the barn door after the horse is gone or something.
Mm-hmm.
I mess these up all the time, Denise. But the bottom line is this, we've kind of come to the point where you're finally recognizing, and to your point about the teachers union, very insightful point about that, you finally realize just how much power these people have been given when they're actually writing the regulations about how to open the schools again. And they're writing CDC reports and recommending,
mm-hmm.
scientific information about opening schools back up again. But, our job is to point this stuff out, is to pay attention, identify it and expose it. I mean, the sunlight is the best disinfectant. It just is. And so our job, while we can't stop people from writing those bills, and we can't say, well, you can't write that or you can't write this, but what we can do is identify it and basically shine the sunlight on it, expose it, and that's when things begin to get cleaned up. Because these politicians, if we don't hold them accountable, then this is where they end up. They end up writing these things that are favorable to their constituencies, favorable to them. And if we're not paying attention, it gets to the point where we're now looking down the barrel of a $4.7 trillion bill that has every, extreme left idea as relates to energy policy and climate policy and labor policy. It's all in here. So we just have to expose it.
There's been this chatter about the $600, and that, that the federal government through Treasury is proposing that anything, that $600 and above gets reported to government, I guess the IRS. And it doesn't matter if it's from a bank or some other payment method, PayPal or Venmo or even Facebook. Now, the question is, where did that come from? How did that get injected into, any of this legislation? And it's kind of like, where does this nonsense? Who wrote it? Who thought of it? Was it? It had to go through a lobby operation, as far as I'm concerned. And the lobby people, whoever they may be, went to, some politician and said, okay, here's a campaign contribution. Get this injected into some kind of a omnibus bill or some kind of a spending bill. How in the world do we find out, who puts this stuff in there? I have a terrible time. I think that somebody like Kevin Brady, who is sitting on the House Ways and Means Committee, which I would argue is the most powerful committee in Washington, D.C., probably knows more about this than anybody, but it's, the silence on this is rather deafening, yes?
Yeah, it is. And I suspect I'm not sure what outside lobby group would want everyone, every transaction over $600 to go to the IRS. I mean, this is an inside job, as they say. I think there's somebody in the financial communication industry, in the executive branch and the agencies that want to know exactly what we're doing with our money. I think it was Marsha Blackburn, the senator from Tennessee, said they want to know when you're buying a couch.
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous. And think about the number of transactions that are over $600. I mean, it's totally irrelevant to go down that road, but this is this kind of total information awareness. I remember back in the Bush years, early on, there was this program called TIA, Total Information Awareness, and it was literally this big eye that they want to know everything about us, and yet in America, the idea of privacy and certain rights, they migrate to us as citizens, and the idea that the government would try to step in, and obviously the issue of compulsory unionism is the same kind of thing. A government says that you can be forced to pay a private organization for the right to work in America. I mean, that's an outrage in and of itself. But where does this stuff come from? I mean,
right.
Certainly in the specific instance you're talking about, I think it's just government. It's the government people. They want to know everything about us, and we the good news is we found out about it, and I think it's going to go away. But what they'll say, well, compromise. And now I think it's $10,000 every transaction over $10,000, no matter what kind of transaction it is the bank has an obligation to report that to someone. And now they're saying the banks have an obligation to report any transaction over $600.
Mm-hmm.
So what do? We compromise and say, oh yeah, well it's not going to be 10. We'll do it for 5,000. Still, the impingement on our individual rights and our privacy. I mean, that's what this is all about. And I don't know where it comes from. I don't know if I want to meet the people that come up with these ideas.
Well, I think in the case of the unions, you've got the union bosses of, the AFL-CIO or, the Teamsters or any of those. I mean, they are the ones that I think have some long umbilical cords tied to certain people in the halls of Congress. And they are certainly in very important committees. And to follow, I think, some of this money and how these subsidies go out to these unions and the regulations or non-regulations to these unions, and then the money that it's the same plan, it's the same template that Planned Parenthood uses. So you're going on the Hill, and you need to, rattle somebody's cage. Whose cage do you want to rattle first, and what do you want to say to them?
Well, I think the loyal opposition ought to be the Republican Party. Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell, those so-called leadership of the Republican caucus would be the primary methods for venting and inquiring about what they're going to do to fight back on this stuff, because they look really good on TV when they come up and talk about individual freedom and individual rights.
Right.
But the talk on the TV is cheap. I mean, they literally need to be pounding the table in Congress on the floor. And they need to be doing it in committee. And if they're doing it, maybe I'm just reading the wrong media outlets. I'm not getting kind of the idea, but they do look good on TV. But it's more than that. It's got to be a commitment, to the fundamentals of this grand experiment in self-government. And yet, because government's gotten so big, I mean, it's almost, you get the sense they've lost sight of that this is about doling out goodies to your friends and then circling back with campaign contributions and money has become, if you're looking to explain things, follow the money. And that's pretty good advice when it comes to looking for reasons why things happen. And, that's why unions are involved in all this. They are wards of government. That's why they've got to play politics, because their power is a derivative of government action. And it goes all the way back to the 1930s. So we've talked about this, Denise, and that's why they've got to play politics. Instead of focusing on the shop floor, they focus on what's going on Capitol Hill or in state capitals around the country, because that's where their power's from. It's not from, the strength of the American worker. It's from the strength of their best friends in politics. That's where it's from.
How many government, how many unions are government employees a member of? I mean, you got
yeah,
the unions that are at the VA, Veterans Administration. You've got the FAA. You've got Border Patrol. I mean, how many are there? 100, 200, 500?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number, but just suffice to say that most federal employees are covered by some type of union contract, unless you're in the national defense business or the military. If you're in the government service, you're probably under a bargaining agreement with some union official. Now, the good news is federal employees are not forced to pay dues to their union to get or keep their jobs, to work for government. That's something that goes beyond our Janus decision, which won those same rights for all government employees at the state level and at the local level. But yeah, everyone's covered, and you've got, even now, the game is the Teamsters are representing government employees now because, and actually, Denise, there are more government union members, there are more government employee union members in America than there are private sector union members now. Yeah.
Say that again. Drive that point home. Say that.
Yeah, there are more government union members in this country than there are private sector union members in America today.
And so their raises and their benefits and their days off and their ability to get free transportation, free parking, free gym memberships, and free this and free that are all negotiated through collective bargaining too, correct?
Most likely, probably, yeah. And they're negotiating with resources that come from all Americans that pay for all this stuff allegedly, or maybe I think the president's trying to convince us that this $4.7 trillion they're trying to ram through both houses doesn't cost us anything. So I guess I can be comforted in that fact, right?
What page number again was this page number that you referred to a little while ago?
2038. It's in this little section, and there's words in there. You'll see it. It's about telecom build out and infrastructure, and it's not overt. You can't see it if you're looking for union labor. But it says you must have complied with certain things. We must feel good about you and how you operate your business. Yeah. And
telecom employees are unionized too. So.
A good chunk of them, yeah. Most of the people that do the build out though are probably not, Denise. The folks that are up there building infrastructure. I mean, we know that in the construction business, only about, I think, somewhere between 15 and 16% of all construction workers are unionized. But yet, if you're going to do work that comes out of the infrastructure bill to build highways and build roads and build other things that are government funded, you're probably not going to be able to compete for those jobs unless you are part of a unionized company. Yeah.
I think you need to write a book.
You need to write the book. You're the one. You get me going here. I can't shut it off. I don't know.
Well, you've given me and my listeners an awful lot to think about here, and we always like to have the backstory, all the little details that seem to always be